Are you struggling to balance your modern life and your faith? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Legacy Dads Podcast with Lance and Dante, offering biblical-based wisdom and that weekly dose of what truly works in men's lives. The Legacy Dads Podcast, real men, authentic faith. Here are your hosts of the Legacy Dads Podcast. They're authentic, transparent, and not always politically correct. Lance and Dante.
Hey everyone, Dante and Lance here again, continuing the conversation. Last week we did the top 10 do's and don'ts for parents ages 1 to 10. This week we're doing the do's and don'ts for parents ages 11 through 18. Before we get some business taken care of. Legacy Dads is your weekly dose of biblical manhood. This podcast is for men, husbands, and fathers in all stages of life, where we promote and advocate proven biblical principles for leaving a lasting legacy. So as we move from last week to this week, to paraphrase it, once upon a time, you had a child who adored you, who thought you were the smartest, toughest, and biggest hero they ever knew. Now you have a slow becoming teenager or 11 to 12-year-old pushing rapidly to teenage years who criticizes or challenges your move and questions your authority and either tries to avoid you or moves away from any chance of utterance from your mouth that might lead them to the truth. With that, Lance, what is number one, baby?
Yeah, that's scary. So just like you did in the intro, you need to acknowledge that over time, the relationship with your child is going to change, and you have to give them a little bit more space. And we talked about this in our stages, the Foundations of Parenting podcast we did. But as a child moves from into the preteen, middle school, and teen years, they're going to be more reliant on their peer group for affirmation, for guidance, and things like that. And realize that you have to realize that your relationship has changed, and they're not going to be running to mom and dad all the time. They're going to be running to friends now, or the internet, or social media, and things like that. So we just need to remember we don't want to be that overbearing or helicopter parent during that time, and questioning them and trying to just rule every single move that they make. And I've seen a lot of parents, and my wife sees this a lot when she does counseling too, where parents just become overly strict. They're so scared because their kids are on the loose now and they're out in the world and talking to friends and stuff. So they just try to, just come down on them so hard with these rules and boundaries and behavior modification stuff. And we just have to acknowledge that. We have to remember that, hey, this is a natural part of a child's process. They're getting ready. They should be preparing to become young adults and then eventually leave the nest. And this is all part of that process. So don't fear it and just embrace it. Does that make sense to you, Dante?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, Lance, and I'm hearing that, if you're a parent and you're trying to be a godly parent and model this, you're also a guide and a mentor, and especially as they're starting to get, their own feet underneath them, their own confidence, their own set of friends, their identity is fully getting developed. They're going to want to start making more and more decisions without, mom and dad, like you say, helicoptering. And what better way than to guide them into the direction that they go? But, that's also, being able to, you understand that, hey, I've got to let this child go. If what we did as parents from 1 to 10 is true, is biblical, and we've been modeling this, then as we start getting to these preteens, teens, we know there's going to be rebellion. We know there's going to be independence. We know there's going to be a struggle for control. And the idea is the more that we give them this ability to step on their own and the confidence, we're not hurting our parenting. Like Lance said in the beginning, we're just taking this to a new chapter, and that's giving them to the ability that, hey, when they hit 18 and whether they go into a trade or to a full-time position or higher education, is that we're giving them the independence that from these preteens to 18, that when we say goodbye, we drop them off at college, and don't mean to make you cry, but that's just around the corner, if you're being honest, is that we're letting them go because we've given them the ability that we've let go, and that we're trusting them in the decision-making that they're making now.
Yep, absolutely. What have we got for number 2, brother?
Number 2, do seize the moments that you have with them. especially, if you're like me now, and, it's art or drama, you got a kid in the play, you got a kid on the cheerleading team, you got a kid on the wrestling team, and, mom and dad are now dividing and conquering. Those meal times that we have together are sacred. Another way is road trips, to and from practice. If you're driving to a different city or you're taking them to a sporting event, sometimes just sitting in those car trips and the like, be a better listener, to your child. You're trying to get into that conversation. What's going on with these group of friends that you have, and you're pushing it, and they're rejecting that because they don't want you to control that friendship or that thing. But, you're going to be there. But I find sometimes when I allow the conversation, to be, open and just sit there and just drive, sometimes they bring the conversation to me. And when they do, don't be a hypocrite. That is, don't live the adage of a parent who says and lives, do what I say, not what I do. So be consistent, so a lot of times you don't have to, if they're opening up to you about something that, is about a friend, the last thing that needs to come out of your mouth is, you're never hanging out with that friend again, or I knew it. Just listen and have that biblical ear that, challenges them not to, tuck tail and run and, close them off and close all the borders, but to listen. And then maybe down the road is, hey, remember that conversation that we had, just something for you to chew on, and give them a biblical application or a challenge. And that way they're looking at you like, well, wait a minute, like mom and dad didn't get all over my grill because of this one friend. Like, Lance, it reminds me of that story that you gave with your daughter on one of our podcasts, with a friend that, was something completely opposite of what you and Jen, set up and modeled for your kids, but you trusted your daughter enough, and some of the life choices that she made, some of the mistakes you were praying that would never happen with your daughter. And the fact that your daughter expressed that, no, she's on this, she's got this, and she brought them to the youth group, and she gave her life to the Lord. That would never have happened if you didn't, give her that freedom to step into that friendship and that trust. And I love that example, Lance, because it hits so home to this point right there. It was being available, being a good listener, being there to support and encourage them, but not, micromanaging and being hypocritical in your response.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I think you hit the nail on the head. So I'm not going to even touch that one anymore. I'll move on to number 3. So number 3, and I'll tell you, if you're older, you guys may not understand this, what the fascination with the younger generation is with social media, but we need to be wise about social media, about Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok. Man, Dante, I'm surprised you know what TikTok is. Now you impressed me. Wow. TikTok,
yeah, well,
right.
I mean, and the thing that blew me away was how innocent, this looks really stupid and funny, and these kids love that. If you really do your research, like you're saying, Lance, TikTok is one of the biggest sources of where people are groomed by predators.
Yeah.
And if you just hear that statement and you're like, what? You're way behind the curveball, and you need to really educate yourself before you sit there and give your 11-year-old a Facebook account, give your 12-year-old a TikTok account, because, everybody else is doing it. You need to really guard yourself against that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the biggest thing I think we're saying here is your kids are going to grow up with it. I mean, this is, if you have kids now, they are going to be in a generation that this is all they know. This is just a part of life now. And it may not be for us as because we're older, but for most kids today, the social media aspect is it's a part of life. So we have to know that where the boundaries are. We have to place boundaries on our kids. We have to understand the risks, like you said, Dante, and that there's predators out there. But we also don't want to be overbearing to the point that when our child feels like they don't have any privacy, or when they go away to college and they move out, then they choose to kind of just, reject everything, every rule we made for them when it comes to either social media or entertainment and TV. So we don't want to be too over the top. Because they're going to reject it, but we also want to be not just laissez-faire and not monitoring or seeing what's going on. And Dante, you gave a great example with one of your daughters when they were away at a sleepover and there's a movie on, And, the first reaction was, why were you guys, that's not an appropriate movie. But then your daughter said, hey dad, we weren't even watching the movie. Some other girl put it on and we were just, it was just in the background. We were having a discussion. So it's one of those things where you have to sometimes just trust, but no, I don't know about you, but what I did with my kids is when they started getting on social media, we started monitoring it. We would either, make sure we knew what their accounts were. We were watching their accounts. We were having, friends that would watch their accounts and things like that. And I know, if you're not the best on social media or technology, kids are getting a lot smarter these days, and they've got their Instagram and then they got their Finsta. So you've got to figure out how all that stuff works, and just monitor that stuff. And if you see something, you maybe call them out on it and be like, hey, do you really want grandma to see that, or, whatever it may be. But, the whole thing is making sure you got boundaries. There has to be some boundaries, but not being too over restrictive on this. So Dante, are you guys dealing with this stuff right now too?
Oh yeah, and the idea is that they know, and sometimes they think that we have more ability than what we really do, but that's just the way that we've modeled that, in the sense of, hey, we're going to check you. Just same thing, like you log on a dad's computer, whether it be for work or for private, and there you see things that are inappropriate or things that don't model. Call me out on it. And likewise, the same thing with you. You guys are texting. You guys are on some of these accounts. We will be monitoring it, and I have friends that, they never wanted to do a Facebook, but because their child had a Facebook account, they have a Facebook account. They're friends with their child on that Facebook account, and they rarely check it, but it's a check and balance for the kid for healthy boundaries. Like, look, think about what you're posting, think about what you're putting out there, and what your witness is to what you're doing it. And Lance, the one thing I want to compliment you and Jen on, a lot of this, especially with the media and the entertainment, is I would have been well behind the curve, but because you've gone that road before we have, shout out to you and Jen for paving that path before us. And so listeners, don't be overwhelmed. I mean, there are some conversations I've had with Lance where I didn't even realize some of these things were out there, and talking through it's just Lance brought me up to speed. Then I did my own research on things, what we're going to allow our kids to have, not allow our kids to have. And the beautiful thing about being real and being open with the kids, like, they know the gateway of TikTok and the danger. So, given the option that they can with limited ability of who their friends are, all of my kids chose not to have this account. And it just made me smile as a parent. Like, we weren't restricting them. We were telling them, be careful what you're posting, be careful how you're identifying where you're at. And all three chose, no, we don't need to have that. And that was one of those things of giving them the freedom to make the decision themselves. And Lance, kudos to you and Jen for paving that way for us before we.
It's real easy. You just go like this. Have you kids heard of the NSA?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know them, and they're watching you.
You're connected, right? Yeah, exactly.
I know where you are at all times, and I know everybody you're talking to.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do we got next, brother?
Number 4, do be willing to talk about tough topics with your kids. And this means, being real with where you're at. So in a healthy way, if stress is something that is an idol to you, or you're overwhelmed with anxiety and you really have anxiety to the point that maybe not be healthy, is that you're modeling them to them, first of all, that you're getting help. You're using medication and not being afraid to use medication to help you with this anxiety, or you're getting professional help and you're showing your kids that, hey, mom has stress, dad has anxiety, or I've got to fight anxiety, or there are pressures of work, or, of a job, or, of life, or my walk, or purity. And you're real with your kid, even politics and religion. What better way to have these conversations with your kids to give them the ability to think for themselves? Lance, you've talked about this time and time again, to have a biblical lens in the real world, and to be able to talk about politics, about religion. And the more you allow your child to be open with you in talking with these tough topics, even if they have wrong answers or not necessarily framing it the way that you would, is allowing them to start verbalizing that and show them some of your stresses, some of your mistakes, some of the struggles that you have as a parent, as a dad, or maybe as a young man, that you blew it, and share that and be honest and raw. Don't avoid talking to your kid about real life issues. Remember that if they don't talk with you, they will be getting bad advice from peers or friends who do not. If you decide not to have these tough conversations, these tough topics with your kids, I promise you, they'll find it from somewhere else that you necessarily would never say that's okay for them to find it.
Yeah, Dante, and you and I could go off on a rant on this one, but when it comes to politics thing, there used to be a time, and I know when I was raised, we had civics class and we talked about different forms of government. We talked about all this stuff, but I will tell you, kids are really not getting that these days. And so, when your kids are like, "Hey, that socialism sounds like a great thing," because they haven't learned, they haven't been told over that, oh yeah, socialism sounds great. It just never works, and it's never worked in the history of mankind, and it's killed more people than, Hitler. And, they don't taught those aspects of it. So it's up to us as parents to kind of say, hey, here's the reality. And again, not pushing our agenda, not saying you have to be the same as me, but saying, I'm just giving you an objective, loving, here's the reality of this. This is what this really is. Now you go do your own research on it type of deal. But yeah, I totally agree with that. And that comes to, again, what you were talking about, the discussions on religion, where, it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. They're going to question you. There's going to be a time where kids are going to question their parents' faith, their parents' beliefs, their parents' values. That's a part of just teen angst. And, you have to be ready for that. And you have to, be understanding that that's a part of their development process, and not come down and just, smash them to bits, but realize that that's part of it. And eventually, statistically, they're going to turn out okay, because their morals and values and all that's set by the time they're age 10. But, it's more about, it's more about the grace of how you handle it. And I think, honestly, I saw this with my wife, and my kids would often bring up things for the shock value. They would say, let's see if we can get mom and dad just crazy.
Oh yeah, let's light their fire right now. Let's really get them going.
Like, hey, I'm gonna vote for that Bernie guy in Vermont because he's a swell dude. It's like, okay, all right, let's go. You want to?
They're on a cargo plane selling rubber chickens in China. That's what I would say.
Yeah. So yeah, it is. There's an element of grace and I think it is. It's how we handle it as parents that makes it big. And that kind of leads into number 5 here too, is choose your battles. That, like we said, you're going to get in confrontation with your kids, and there's battles you're going to win, and there's battles that just, if you're married, you should already know this lesson. There's times where you just got to shut your mouth. So now, we're not saying there's absolutes, there's absolutes, and there's biblical and moral boundaries that every child should have. And we say, hey, we don't cross those. But, also don't walk away from the tough conversations. Don't be afraid to be that balance of truth and grace, showing truth and love, and having, tough conversations, but also realize that some of those battles is just like, hey, you know what? It's not worth it. I'm going to, we talked about this previously, Dante, but I said when it came to, biblical morals and values, or things that we really held, when it came to that type of thing, me and my wife would hold our ground. Other stuff, you want to dye your hair purple, have at it. It's your hair. It's your hair. If you want to walk around looking weird, whatever. So there's just certain things we were like, whatever. But as long as it didn't cross an absolute, biblical moral or boundary, we were like, we're not even going to argue with that. So,
I love that. I mean, and that's the thing, is allowing the kid to express who they are, giving a little bit of autonomy, it really goes a long way with the child, because, then all of a sudden, like Lance, I love what you just said, that the minors, they're not going to divide this family. They're not going to be contrary to the word of God. And it has given them the chance to express some of the needs that maybe they just want to test the waters. And, they dye their hair purple, and then they go to school and they absolutely hate it, and then they come back and they go and they do this, and maybe that opens up a conversation like, hey, Dad, Mom, why didn't you say that I couldn't have purple hair? Everybody said this or whatever, but the idea is like, you're free to do what you want to do in these situations. We're not going to question that, but these are the things that we definitely want boundaries that you understand, and whether your kid says it or they don't, they need boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do we got for number 6 here, brother?
Do spend quality time with your kids.
Yep.
In the case of sons and daughters, moms, date your boys, show them what a date, how to treat the women. Dads, date your daughters, show them how a godly man should treat them going out. When you go on vacation with them, when you plan time to spend with them, do make that quality time in that. And when I say quality, how much time should you spend with your kid? Use the word often, as much quantity as possible that you can with your kids, because they crave it, they need it, they desire it. God wants us to do that. And at all times talk about truths, talk about character, developing them into challenging them into ways that make them think beyond, what it needs to be in making these right decisions, and to know that they're going into, from boyhood to manhood, from girls to womanhood, and that you're raising them, but you're also giving them the vote and the confidence that you trust them. And I think by spending this quality time with them, you can really develop and really get into that place. I just did a Friday daddy-daughter dance with my youngest, who's 12 and rapidly approaching a teen, and my middle one outgrew it last year, but my little one, I absolutely had a blast. We ate dinner afterwards, which normally we wouldn't be home that late, but when we sat at the restaurant, and I haven't laughed that hard in a long time, and it was just like I saw my little girl into this young woman that I just so enjoyed. And it's like daddy and little daughter's secret now of all the conversation, because people want to know what's so funny. But that was just me spending the time. And then the opposite end, don't avoid your kids because of work or because of church or because of community demand. So guys, if you're on a school board, you're on an elder board, you're on a deacon board, and you're doing everything else, and it's ultimately taking too much time away from your kids or your wife, do me a favor. Make a commitment that as you grow in your walk, or you grow in your godly manhood, is that you're going to make a promise to your wife and your kids that there's going to come a point where if all of a sudden the wife needs to say, hey, Dante, hey, Lance, pull back. I need you here. There's some developing issues or some friend issues that need your time and your attention, to be willing to have that. Don't show your kid that, other things are so much more important to them than they are. And that's the thing, is if I'm going to put work or church or anything else ahead of them, they're going to eventually reject that path. And if they understand that, no, God number one, wife, family number 2 and 3, or however you want to ordain that and order that, is that they know that there's a priority and where they stand on that priority. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, and I would say this is not even not just in the personal. I definitely think it's, doing that quality time one-on-one. But, I know for me, Dante, I travel a lot, I'm gone a lot, and I had to rely on, hey, texting with my kids and just, stuff like that, is saying, hey, I miss you. I love you. Can't wait to see you. How's your week going? Especially, the kids these days are much more savvy. They've all got smartphones, and especially when they get into teenage years, they're texting. So I use that to my advantage. I said, hey, that's just another communication method. I can reach out to my kids and just let them know that, hey, dad loves you. I'm thinking about you. How's it going? And my kids are both grown and out of the house now, and I still do that with them on a weekly basis. And then, little things too. I talked about it. I think I made a post last week, but it's Valentine's Day. Buy your daughters some flowers too, and show them, hey, I really love you guys. Just like, I love your mother or whatever. Those types of things, I think they go a long way to show that connection, that quality time with your kids, and it's a way of modeling it. So that's really good. And that kind of hits on the next one a little bit too. Number 7 is do keep communication channels open no matter what. So what we're talking about here, and this is something that my wife and I studied when we did marriage counseling, but there's something called stonewalling, and stonewalling is basically like, your wife or your child or somebody does something, and rather than communicating, you decide just, I'm going to shut down and I'm going to ignore them, or I'm going to put up this wall and not talk to them. And that's just the wrong answer. And that's what you were talking about earlier, Dante, too, about you want to push your daughters into, attention or affection somewhere else. That's a great way to do it. And it's delicate at this stage because, as we talked about throughout this podcast, your kids are going through this change where mom and dad aren't as important. They're going to their peers more, but that doesn't mean we stop engaging them. It doesn't mean we stop trying to communicate with them. And I think another aspect of this too, Dante, is that we don't want want to be hypocritical with them. We don't want to change, punishment or to dole out some unfair judgment, judgment that isn't fitting of the crime. We really need to understand that and realize that, there has to be communication and don't, like we said, when we were talking about it earlier, if we're in an argument or we think the child has misbehaved, don't shut that communication channel down before we get a chance to hear their side of the story. That also plays into this factor as well. Do you agree with this, or what do you got on this, brother?
Yeah, and I think information and communication is critical because you start drawing a line because the child's not checking the box your way or doing the things that you prefer, or maybe this is a way that your family raised you, but biblically you and your spouse are not on that same page, and you're going to model that same thing that you didn't like when you were growing up. That's pushing the child the opposite way. But keeping an open line of communication. This goes back into last week's podcast, and unconditional love, truth, with grace-based parenting, and that's the idea. Is that, look, mom and dad aren't happy about your decisions right now, or your willingness to disobey, and there's consequence for that. But the idea that, no, I love you, and that doesn't change, and that's the idea, is that you're walking out your faith with them, you're making it real, and the process of, yeah, they know you're disappointed because they know your rules. Yeah, they know that they're out of bounds, but it doesn't change the fact that you still love them. I mean, God forbid, I said that last week too, Lance. Like if God's love for us was conditional, Lord help us. That's why we couldn't make it on our own, because He had to send His Son Jesus, because we can't make it on our own. And if we're gonna model that to our kids, we have to be willing to always be open with communication, even when sometimes it hurts us too, knowing that they're making destructive decisions or they're out of bounds. But it's just being intentional, and it's trying to model, the way that you want your child to go, and that's like being willing to be open and to be communicating in all aspects.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And I would say that too, that goes not only, I know we all probably know, or you may be listening out there and you understand that there's people that maybe the kids have gone astray, or people or friends or family have gone astray. And you just said you've written them off and you're saying, hey, I'm not going to communicate with them, or I've just written them out of my life. And I understand there's some toxic people. Sometimes you have to do that. But if it's something that's just, if it's not, something atrocious, and you just decided I'm not going to communicate with that person anymore for whatever reason, we need the biblical example. We need the ones that reach out, and forgive and lead a godly character and show them what Christ-like faith looks like. And I think that starts with opening those lines of communication and reaching out to those people. And, I remember working with, guys who in men's ministry who, they came from bad homes where their fathers, beat them and they literally hated their father. But I said, hey, I know you're not there right now, but I really encourage you to reach out to that person, reach out to your father, have a discussion with him, tell him what, how you feel, forgive him, not because you condone, not because you,
you're affirming the bad behavior.
Yeah, the bad behavior, but you're choosing to be Christ-like in forgiveness and getting that bitterness out of your life. But I think that's really important across all boundaries, not just with parenting, but in life, just keeping those communication channels open. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and that's biblical too. And listener, I don't want to minimize that, because what Lance said, I think, is imperative. It's that vertical relationship and the authority. And, maybe you had a really crappy or just a really toxic parent, or some, a parent that was just so messed up from their childhood that it just continued. And maybe if you're hurting this, Lance and I dug up a wound, like maybe that parent is not alive anymore. And we would ask you in that process is to really, get counseling, get, together with a pastor or an elder or a brother, and be raw and honest on that. And maybe write out, a forgiveness, letter or speech, and what, but you're choosing forgiveness because, I think when you put it in perspective of the vertical aspect of, regardless of whether they were a father or that father figure or that dad figure, but they weren't, acting that in any way, shape or form biblically, you're still respecting the position that they had in your life. And the idea of just, practicing that and working that out, I think really will help that child and help your teenager, preteen in character development. And that's, no, do I want to be a doormat for somebody that's going to beat me or torture me or anything like that? Absolutely not. Not opening up that chain or that toxic, relationship. Again, putting boundaries in that, but definitely, forgive, and the idea is, forgive even the atrocities. Yeah, because I think if we withhold it, we're not lining up with scripture. And I mean, granted, if they're really bad, and I know some relationships out there that the beatings and even the abuse and things that should never have happened to a child, I'm just saying it's for your health and benefit to, put that in the sense of surrendering that to God and letting God work in your heart through that, because in the long run, it's going to free you from this victim mentality and to this abuse and to this just destructive behavior that you don't need to be a prisoner of, because you never deserve that from a parent figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say that. I was going to say, don't give that crap power over you.
No, free yourself.
Free yourself. Turn that stuff over to God and say, I wouldn't choose, and I didn't want this stuff to happen to me, but maybe it did. But it's not going to have any power over me. Only God is going to have power over me. So I'm turning this stuff over and getting rid of it out of my life. And man, that is that you're just talking about. I've seen so many people healed by just letting some of that crap go and just letting God. Fill them with love where that bitterness once was. So,
because he's the Father, he will always be, and he'll meet us in many ways that, broken relationships in our life I can never imagine. And I love that, Lance. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do we got for number 8 here, brother?
Number 8, do encourage your child to spend time alone. This is one of the spiritual disciplines.
In time out.
Yeah, no, not in time out. But in prayer, in reading, reflecting, and just downright downtime to energize their soul. Sometimes it's really healthy just to unplug. Lance, you and Jen, you and the family have done this very well in hiking and camping and trailing. Other people do it, either via hunting, other people do it through running, but, just basically teaching your child, get in alone time with God, get in alone time with yourself, praying, seeking, asking, praying for others, but also, a time to educate yourself by reading, classic books, reading books that, can develop you in either the career that you're in or things that you want to develop yourself, and just getting, out of the monotony of everyday stress and anxiety through media, through the daily plugs that we get every day. And, I think that just, really will help and develop your child and take away some of the things that cause so much anxiety. And the other side of this is don't create busyness in their life that they don't know how to slow down. And so I think when you encourage your child to, find this alone time, spiritual disciplines, prayer, fasting, seeking the Lord, in prayer and petition, I think these are ways that really ground them to a relationship with our Maker. And the idea that you're not creating this busyness, not even going to go into a tangent on this, whether it be travel sports, whether it be, something that is just motivated, that we don't know how to slow down, that we start practicing what we're preaching and we start modeling this to our kids too. So if we're not spending that time in a closet or the prayer room or in a hiking situation where we're just unplugging, turning off phones, turning off TV, showing our kids how to do it, it's not going to be a good place for them. It's going to be better if you can really model this for your child in development.
Yeah, and Dante, I would say I think this is a generational shift too, because back in our day it was kind of the old, hey, if you give a child too much free time, they're going to get in trouble. They're gonna do things in destructive ways, and I think the pendulum has swung the other way now, and we're seeing that children don't have any free time. We are filling their schedules to the brim, and if you look at the statistics, it's causing stress and anxiety and anxiousness among the kids today, and we are just overloading them, and we have to be willing to say enough and put some boundaries on it and say, you know what, we are not gonna, travel teams. I've seen travel teams because every single weekend, Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, you are out of town, you're doing stuff. And it's like, hey, we have to put our foot down and say, no, we're not going to be that busy. And we need to take back some of our time. So I think this is something that's generationally shifted, where before it was like we had a bunch of free time. Now there is no free time. And so we have to take back some of that free time. And I totally agree with that, Dante. Don't just create busyness in their life. It's okay. We talked about that a couple weeks ago about being still and knowing God is there and just taking that quiet time. And we need to do that for our kids as well. So the next one, number 9 here, is do encourage your teenager, in all that they do. And we're talking about being realistic here. It's not, don't be a cheerleader for everything. Don't, take every single detail or every single thing they do. And don't be this, parent that just, I'm going to be constantly positive and not point out the negatives. And we talked about that. It's okay to have failure. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to blow it. But we want to encourage them to do hard things, encourage them to do things that maybe we know they're going to fail, but encourage them to try. And if they try and they fail, hey, at least they tried it, because there's so many people in life that don't even try because they're afraid of that failure. So I would rather encourage my child to go out and try it. And if they fail, say, you know what? Hey, at least you tried. You're never going to go back and sit around and be 20 years from now saying, man, I wish I would have tried to do that and I never did. Yep. So I mean, no, seriously. And that's, so I would just say that encourage your child, be their cheerleader, but, do it realistically. It's like, if your child is out there, and I guess this is, more on the younger side, but if your child's doing something and you're like, wow, you are the best, swinger on a park swing in the history of park swing. It's like, okay, that's a little bit.
Over the top. Yeah.
Over the top there.
Knock it off, Mom. Knock it off. Yeah. They're not, you may think that they're going to be the next Michael Jordan in basketball, but let's be honest, in my case, we're not going to be that. So just come to reality, come back down from, they're not Eric Jordan or they're not the Wayne Gretzky that you think they are.
Yeah. And I would say that's just realistic expectations too. And, I hate to burst your bubble. I did a post on this on sports statistics years and years ago, but your child's chances of making it professionally in sports is, you have a better chance of winning the lottery like 7 times over. And if you look at the statistics on that, most athletes are natural athletes, and some of them don't even start in their sport until they're in high school or college level. You look at your Michael Jordans and some of your other ones out there, they are just naturally gifted. So they weren't on the travel team when they were 5 years old, and that's what made them professional athletes. So get that thought out of your head. So I think, Dante, this brings us up to the last one. So what do we got for number 10?
Number 10, do set rules and boundaries for your teenager. Lance said in the last podcast, him and Jen, they absolutely, wrote down on a list for their kids to see. The same things change. Maybe the rules are a little bit different. You're going to have a teenager, in my case, I'm going to have somebody that's going to have a license here in a few months. And I can't remember the guy how to have a new child by Friday, Tuesday. And he gives this thing, Pastor Kevin, I forget his last name. But one of the things where he's talking about is like, they had rules and, hey, you're going to have your room cleaned before you take the car out for the weekend. And he didn't micromanage. He wasn't on them, let them live their life independence. And all of a sudden Friday came around to grab the keys to go out on that, group outing or that date that they had. There are no car keys to be had. Why? The rules weren't done. The rules was Friday before you have the car for the weekend, the room's clean. And, don't be afraid, that you're going to just totally, have a child that's going to like push back. A life lesson in that is when you set rules, you set boundaries for your child, whether they say they want them or they don't, they need them. And they need them because we need boundaries in our own walks. I mean, look at us unchecked. We're sinners, we're broken, we'll make mistakes. With the rules, with the way that we need these boundaries for God in our life, if we live by them, we find the abundant life. Your kid needs the same kind of modeling. Don't take the rebellion or denouncing of the authority as a personal attack. So when they push back or they walk off, and they just say something that that they never meant, or they're just mumbling under their breath, that you just make that a hill that you're going to die on. Don't take it personal. When they start to meet these things out, or you're making these rules and these boundaries and they violate them, you don't have to be the good guy all the time. Being a manager, being a parent, being a guide, being a mentor, you're going to have situations where you're not going to be the most popular person in the room. And when you need to discipline your child or enforce the rules, the boundaries that you've set as a household, meaning these rules, these boundaries are preempted. They know the rules, they know the boundaries. And so you're not, off the cuff making them up as you go. And so when that child violates that you follow through, and that they know it. And so they may hate you. You may be the worst person alive. They may just give you attitude, and that's fine. Don't react the way that they're reacting to you. Don't take offense to how they're doing that.
Yeah, and I would say that, we talked about this in a previous podcast, Dante, too. And also, we have to remember, what is the intent and the principle behind some of these rules and boundaries. Some of these things, if it's, hey, your curfew's at 10 o'clock, be home at 10 o'clock. It's not like, thus saith the Lord. And,
10:01, they roll in.
10:01, they're like, oh, you're ripping the Xbox out of their room. It's like, oh, you weren't here. But, and I think you brought this up where you're getting a call, 10:05, the child calls and says, hey, I'm sorry I'm running late. I know it's past curfew. I'm just trying to get some guys dropped off safely at home, and then I'm going to be on my way home. To me, that's like, okay, you understand the intent. You're trying to be safe. You're trying to get the buddies home. I get it. Thanks for calling. Thank you for letting me know. To me, that's like one of those things. It's like, okay, you did the right thing there. Or, I've had it where the kids said, hey, we're going to go out and do this. Hey, we're going over to somebody else's house. Give me a call and let me know what time you guys are going to be home. Again, you have to look at the intent behind these things. And especially when a lot of these, we're talking about rules and boundaries with curfews and different types of things. These aren't moral absolutes. These are just, things to keep our kids safe. And if they're calling us, if they're communicating with us, if there's, exigent circumstances involved where, hey, we're just, trying to get a ride home or something like that, practice went overtime or whatever, we have to take those things into consideration, and to think about that. So, absolutely. So with that, guys, there you go. That's your, top 10 rules, things and to follow with your children who are, teenagers. It's really easy to talk about them. It's a lot harder to implement them in real life. These things sound easy. I know if you don't have teenagers yet, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That's easy. And wait till you're in the trenches, dealing with teenagers, and you'll see it's a little bit harder to put these things into practice. But, these are, and again, these aren't, thus saith the Lord. These are, just some lessons learned from both Dante and I, and just raising teenagers and kids and seeing, some of the best practices. But it's going to be different for every household, because every household's different. Every child's different. Every, relationship's different. And some of these things are probably, maybe you don't have an issue with one of these areas and there's something else that's more important, and that would be a higher number on your list. So you need to look at that. But, again, these are general guidelines you want to look at and implement into your household, and we've talked about this over and over, Dante, that I think if you start the foundation early, if you start these things back when they're 2 and 3 and 4 years old, it makes the process so much easier as you move through the child development stages, as you move into the teenage years and then launching them off into college. It makes these things so much easier. And if you haven't done this, I'm not gonna lie, it's never too late, but it makes it a little bit harder if all of a sudden one day you come home and like, all right, we're going to make rules up. And I know you kids are 17 years old now, but we're going to have all these rules in the house. It may take a little bit more, to implement this stuff, but it is never too late. You can go back and try to, bring some of this stuff into, where they're at. But just realize the longer you wait, the more grace you have to have in the implementation of some of this stuff. So you got any final closing comments, Dante, and we'll wrap this thing up.
You nailed it. Way to close it, Lance. That was awesome.
All right. So, guys, we want to say thank you so much. As always, thank you for your support. You can go check us out on Spotify, Pandora, and iTunes. Hit the subscribe button, leave us a great 5-star review. You can also talk to us over on Instagram and Facebook. We got a closed Facebook page in there where you can talk a little bit more in depth. You can, talk about, ask some questions about Dante, about what is it like raising a teenage daughter, because I'm pulling my hair out right now. And I could throw some crazy stories in there as well of stuff that happened to me. But absolutely, guys, we are here. We're here to do this together as men, as husbands, as fathers, to walk through this thing and do it all through a biblical lens, under God's guidance and under the blood of our Savior Jesus Christ. And that's what we're trying to do. So we are stronger as a group than we are by ourselves. No lone rangers out there. So with that, guys, we want to say, as always, we love you guys. We are praying for you guys. We thank you guys so much for your support. We will see you next time. Take care, and God bless.
God bless.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legacy Dads Podcast with Lance and Dante. Real men, authentic faith. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit legacydads.org and on Facebook.com/LegacyDads and on Twitter @Legacy_Dad. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on the Legacy Dads Podcast. Real men, authentic faith.